every time you mention the book, you are promoting your book. You don't even have to say, buy my book. Even now that we're talking about me and these books, I bet there's someone who's listening to this who's going to be like, you know what, let me go see what these books are that she has written. It's a way of promotion. So promoting doesn't mean asking people to buy perpetually. It just means sharing what you have done.
My name is Bethany Saltman, and I am an author and a best-selling book coach.
And I'm Fran Hauser. I'm an author, a keynote speaker, and a publishing strategist. These How I Did It conversations will inspire listeners to claim their own authority mindset and turn the story they can't stop telling into a book the world needs to read.
This is Bookbound, the podcast, created in partnership with Share Your Genius. Thanks for joining us for another episode of Bookbound. Today's guest is a very special one. She wrote 4 books in 4 years, which is pretty incredible. Do you think she's got some energy? Her name is Bola Sokunbi. She's a finance expert, 4-time best-selling author, speaker, and founder of a personal finance education platform for women called Clever Girl Finance. Her latest book is called Choosing to Prosper, Triumphing Over Adversity, Breaking Out of Comfort Zones, and Achieving Your Life and Money Dream. Her author journey is especially fascinating because of how quickly she moves and how much intention goes into everything she does. Between her business savvy and her experience in publishing, we're very excited for you to hear her approach to building a book, your business, your brand at the same time. So without further ado, let's dive in. Hey, Bola, it is so great to see you. And thank you so much for joining us on Bookbound.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to have this conversation with you.
Awesome. So we begin every episode with the same line of questioning about how writers discover their book idea. Now, you have a unique situation because you are a 4-time bestseller and you have a giant, successful, exciting, incredible business that's related to your books. So I'd love for you to talk to us and our listeners about how you understand the difference between a book and a business.
I think that's a really good question. I mean, for me, my idea around writing my books were to help amplify my business. I never thought about myself as an author. So to me, a book was this really impressive body of work that someone spent years writing. Like when you think about the big famous writers that say they spent 10 years writing this book. So in my mind, that was what a book was, right? And then there comes me and I'm like, well, I have this idea that I could package all this content that I'm sharing as part of my business and create a body of work that could also be called a book, but then in the finance space. So a business is basically, it's the day-to-day of building whatever it is that you're intending to build, whatever product or service you're selling, whatever impact you're trying to have with your business, whatever milestones you're trying to have with your business. To me, that's how I look at business. It's the active doing, whereas a book, on the other hand, is a lot of effort to create, but once it's created, right? And it's now out there as your spokesperson, as your PR person, as your brand representative. So it's almost like an extension of my brand. And like I said, my books are there to help amplify the business I do, because a lot of people will find out about my business, Clever Girl Finance, by picking up a book, right? They may not be active on social, they may not be YouTube viewers or podcast listeners, but they may find themselves in a bookstore or on Audible or on Amazon, and then they pick up this book. So the book is out there. It's this body of work that I created that one time over that period of time, but then it's actively working for me out there.
I love the distinction you made. Before you wrote a book, you thought of books as these long, drawn out, hefty experiences or things. And then you wrote a book and it was a little bit different. And the people that we work with talk a lot about that because some are writers sort of going into their solitary art and others are really wanting to, like you said, amplify their business. So how did you think about yourself as you wrote these books? Did you consider yourself a writer, author?
So I've always been a writer. So I write a lot of content. Well, I used to write a lot of content when it was just me working in my business, running my business. I used to write a lot of content. So I do consider myself a writer. I can write on financial topics. I used to be a blogger. But an author is something that I didn't consider myself to be because in my mind, it was tied to that big body of work. And even today, I don't refer to myself first as author. I have to pause and think about it. And that's because I'm so involved in my business and the books are based on the work that I do that I have to reframe my thinking very often to say, wait a minute, you are an author, you have written this book. That is part of your title in addition to CEO and founder and etc.
Bola, can you go back to when you were working on your very first book and what that process was like? Did you have anybody helping you? Did you have an agent? Did you have an editor? Did you write a book proposal? What did that look like for you?
So going back to my first book, I'd actually started writing the book before I got any book deal, before I had done any book proposal. I was thinking that, in the future at some point I would do a book proposal, but it's a good way for me to build credibility and improve my brand. That's what I was thinking, to write a book. So I started writing a book. And while I was writing that book, there was really no rhyme or reason. I had young kids. So I wrote this book about 7 years ago now. So my kids would have been three, have twins. And so there really wasn't like, how people say, oh, I lock myself in a hotel room or I spend 6 hours a day writing. That was not possible for me. I was writing whenever I could. I would wake up early. I would stay up late. If I got a spare moment on the weekend, I would write. There was no fixed schedule or strategy to writing. I just wrote when I had the time. And then my publisher happened to reach out to me and pitched me writing a book. And I had actually already been writing a book. So I was like, wait, that's a great idea. I actually have a book I've been writing along the lines of what you were thinking. I did formalize it into a proposal that my editor at the time could present to like their board meeting to get approval for the book. But I didn't go through the formal pitching process because my publisher approached me. I was really happy to work with Wiley because they're in the academic content space.
How did Wiley first learn about you?
From social media, from the content we create. So people often ask that question about, do we have PR? But it's really the content that we create. We create content for social media, for YouTube, for podcasts, and then we repurpose those content in multiple different ways. So there's always something out there. And people have found that stuff and then reached out to us for different opportunities, including the book.
So was it even necessary for you to bring on an agent or did you negotiate?
I did not have an agent. I had never reviewed a book contract before, but I had a good friend who was a business lawyer. And she's shifted her practice now. And she's also an entrepreneur. And she's like, listen, we're just going to go over this book deal and we're going to ask for the most. I'm going to do some research, what book deals for first-time authors look like. And we're just going to push the envelope as far as we can push it. And one of the things that she told me was that let's not get caught up in a book advance because the book advance is tied to royalties. You're going to have to pay this back with your book sales anyway. Let's focus on getting the rights to your book after X amount of years. Let's focus on if for one day, by some amazing miracle, your book gets turned into a series or into a TV show or gets syndicated in some way. Let's focus on the rights around that. Let's focus on the percentage of the royalty you're going to get and let's negotiate that to the max possible. So we really pushed the envelope on that, but they did concede to a lot of things I asked for. So I asked for an increase in the royalty percentage. I asked for a reduction in the amount of years as to which I would get the rights to my book back. I asked for an increased percentage on international sales or if the book was translated into other languages. The first book is actually in Indonesian. I asked for increased percentages around if the book ever became something like a series or a movie or syndicated, anything like that. And that has been the baseline for every individual book deal from there. And I also did not commit to a multi-book deal because one of the pieces of advice my friend gave me was like, this is your first book, because you've never written anything, you've never sold anything, you're not going to get the best offer on this first book until you've been able to prove your sales. In addition to the numbers and the dollar signs, I told my editor, I'm like, listen, I have a platform behind me and I'm going to do everything I can to support this book. And I would like to know how you are going to support me. So I asked for dedicated PR to help promote the books and to help reach out to media platforms. And those are all things that I just ask because to me, like, they can say no. I was already writing this book anyway. I was self-published. I have nothing to lose at this point because it was, again, an amplification of something I already had going on.
I mean, I just love that you like brought your clever girl finance, your experience, your expertise, your mindset. Like you totally brought that to this negotiation. I'm just like picturing that conversation with you and your editor, where the editor's like, all right, come on now. Like we got to draw the line in the sand. And you're like, no, I'm clever girl finance.
I didn't come to look for you. You came to find me, so.
A lot of leverage there.
I love it. Well, it also really shows our listeners that agents are much more legal than they might think. Because first-time authors think that the agent is all about the taste making and the king and the queen making. But you have done this without the agent, but with a clever lawyer.
Yes. I definitely see how having an agent can be useful, right? But for me, I almost feel like my business, the platform that we had built, almost acts as that agent, acts as that PR person, because that's how the relationship was established. And leveraging the audience built around the business is how I was able to have them agree to the negotiations we had. So if you are just starting out and you may not have a business platform yet, you may just want to write a book on a topic of interest to you. You're not interested in building a business, you're not interested in amplifying anything, then an agent might be a way to help you establish those relationships. But I've also seen friends who don't have businesses, who have written books, who have been traditionally published by mainstream publishers, but they have taken on the agent role upon themselves. And that is a lot of work where they are the ones who are actively out there networking, making introductions, etc. And so it just depends on your personality. I wouldn't do that. I'm more introverted. I don't always like people.
Fair. We can both so relate to what you're saying.
That's so interesting. Yeah, I mean, the agent thing is a whole rabbit hole that I'm going to resist hopping into because it's endlessly interesting. So one of the things, and I've been, reading your social media and watching some videos, and I just love the way that you present, and some of the interviews that you've had have been really interesting to me. One of the things that I loved was you saying that you talk about aligning goals with what makes you happy. That's how to be successful. I absolutely love that. And in thinking about, how to align yourself with what makes you happy, because now you've written many books, what's the tension between doing what you want to do and delivering to an audience?
So I've always tried to be authentic to myself. I had struggles writing my first 2 books because they were on the topic of my business, which is personal finance, right? And I had so much more to say because I'm a business owner who talks about the topic of personal finance. I didn't much get the chance to put on my business owner or my entrepreneur hat because I was using my financial hat. So I had to really adjust, like, okay, I can't do this business entrepreneur angle just yet, but I can figure out how to be happy writing about personal finance, which I do enjoy doing, but sometimes it's a balance for me because I do love the business of business. I just focus on writing those 2 books tied very much into why I started my business, which is to help women make smart financial decisions and build financial wellness for themselves. So that was my happiness angle. I know these books are going to impact somebody positively who is trying to improve their finances. And so that's how I was able to align that goal with my happiness by thinking about what the impact, what the outcome would be once the book was finished. And because I had no intention of writing a second book or a third book or a fourth book. It was like, I'm going to write this one book and it's going to be my book forever. And I go, wait a minute, do you want to talk about investing? And I'm like, oh, okay, sure. And then my third book, which was about side hustles, that was my favorite book to write. And was writing about personal finance a little bit, but more so about starting a business and everything that I love about being in the business of business. So that was, the topic itself was, again, aligned to my happiness. And my fourth book was my personal story about building my business, my background, why I do what I do. So I think when writing a book, it's important to pick a topic that interests you, that you're passionate about, even if it's a work-related topic or you want to advocate for, because the book writing journey is a long one. It can get frustrating. You can get stuck. And I know there are many, many uncompleted books out in the world. I have a fiction book I have not completed.
That's exciting.
I love it.
That was just because, I have no incentive to complete this because it's just not tied to anything that is exciting now or is tied to anything that makes me happy. It was just an idea. And
I still can't believe that you wrote 4 books in 4 years. I know so many people who have been spending years on their first book, getting their first book out. So how did you find that momentum? I would love to hear, like, tactically speaking, even like how you did it.
So I will admit it was really hard because I had young kids. I did feel a lot of burnout because it was almost like writing books is a side hustle. It's not my main job, and I have my main business to run. So it was very challenging. And so I mentioned before that there was really no rhyme or reason to the way I wrote at the beginning. But then as I started to realize, okay, I'm getting close to a deadline, I need to submit this book so I can carry on with what I'm doing. I needed more structure. So I started waking up at like 4 a.m. in the morning and I would just write for an hour or two. I'd write whatever I had to write. If I had nothing to write, then I would just sit there and wait for my kid to wake up so that we could get ready for school and for the day. But that was my goal, to try to write every morning. And there were weeks where I just did that consistently and I made progress. And there are weeks where I just couldn't get around to it. Like I would wake up at 4 a.m. and then my email would pop. It would be like email and it would be my business. And like, oh my God, I haven't written this book for 3 weeks, 4 weeks. I don't remember what the last paragraph was. I had to go back and reread everything. So the next few weeks are me rereading what I wrote. So I remember my path. And what I did was I had a Word document that I wrote on, but I just made my writing transferable. So if we were in a car ride somewhere and it was long, I would write in my notes app and I would be able to look at my Word document in the cloud and I would just carry on from there. And I stopped going back to edit. I just wrote straight through. There was no spell checking, editing. I just wrote straight through. And then I told people that I was writing to keep me accountable. Like, I need to get this done by this date. My husband, my friends, they all knew that I had a deadline. And sometimes I would do audio to text.
I love audio to text, especially in the car.
That's basically what I did from a tactical perspective. I tried to set a schedule. I tried to stick to as much as I could. I tried to minimize me getting in my way because a lot of times with writers, we go back and revisit what we've written over and over again to make sure we sound like what we want it to sound like. But the truth is, like, we need to complete it. And then we can always go back and edit and rework, or you can hand it to a developmental editor. The other thing that was really helpful for me is that before every book I wrote, I always created an outline. I know exactly what I want to say because I've written an outline. So I would spend the first few weeks like laying out my outline. These are what my chapters are going to be. These are what my subsections of each chapter are going to be. These are the topics. This is the general theme of each. And that was what I stuck to. And so very rarely did I go off path or did I go on tangents. And so the outline is something that I strongly recommend because it just helps you stay focused on what it is you intend to write. And it helps you get clear at the beginning of what it is you want to write. So you don't just start going off on tangents. And I know that a lot of writers struggle with that. I'm a big Game of Thrones fan. And the biggest complaint about George R. Martin is that he keeps writing. He kept writing all these other books and not completing Game of Thrones. He kept going off on different tangents, different worlds, different families. Stop it. Come back. Finish this.
I love the idea of an outline, and I love the idea of not being precious about that first draft. Just like get the content into the Google Doc, into the Word doc, whatever it is, and then you go back and you tear it apart and you smooth it out and you write whatever you need to do to make it sound great. Bola, I would love to hear, just shifting gears a little bit about, with these 4 books, what did marketing look like for you? How did you use your platform to amplify these books, to get the book out into the world? And what worked for you? Like, what did you see that actually converted into sales?
So the books, I never stop talking about them. They are a body of work that stays consistent. They're always relevant. They're on a foundational life topic, finance, business. It doesn't get old. And so the one thing I would say is I always talk about my books. I always promote my books on social media, even though that first book now came out in 2018. I'm about to start working on the updated, expanded version of it. But even though it came out 6 years ago, you still see it being talked about on the platform, on the podcast, the newsletters, recommended. It's just something that I actively promote. Friends, family, I always have copies of my book. And I also donate books. So like there's organizations who support like women in transition that I'll donate books to schools, to organizations, and they found their way to different places. And I get an email saying, hey, I got a copy of your book. So I always tell people, like, for me, even the small marketing, it matters, and it matters more so than the big TV show. And I've done TV shows and I've moved numbers, I've moved books from the TV shows, but the next day, the next morning show comes on, you're yesterday's news, right? Nobody is going back to watch yesterday's Good Morning America or yesterday's Kelly and Ryan or anything like that. It happens in that moment, but what you're doing in those small ways remains ongoing. So initially what I did was I let people know on social media that, hey, I have a book coming out. I signed a book contract. I have a book coming out. I kind of kept people abreast of the process. I'm recording the audiobook. I put a picture up. The book is coming out today. Here's a launch date. Emails, giveaways, outreach to other podcasts to get featured, outreach to TV shows, and my publisher helped me with that, outreach to radio. And then anytime I do like non-related work, like if I'm on TV, if I have a radio show, a podcast, I always mention my books organically as part of the conversation. I'm always talking about my books. So for someone who is thinking about ways to market their books, I would say start by creating a list of everybody in your network that you can tell about your book, and you can give a free copy. Like for me, one of the things I find people hesitant to do is buy their own book. I buy my book all the time because I give them away. I gave my book away to a lady who came to help with organizing, to a woman who came to help design closets, to any woman that comes to my house, a wife, a partner, a friend of somebody who knows somebody. I give them my books. I'm always giving out the books. I mailed books to just people I admired, people out in social media that I engage with. You are the number one cheerleader of your book. Nobody else can promote your book better than you. So social media, creating videos. I created video series on topics on my book. I created podcast episodes on topics of my book. So I just made myself responsible for marketing my book. I knew my publisher was going to help me, but I was like, you know what? Let's imagine that they're not going to do anything for me. I can post on Instagram, I can post on YouTube, I can post on LinkedIn, I can email my newsletter, I can email my network, I can tell my friends and family, I can leave my books in Starbucks and give them out to people at the airport. I can do all these things. I can donate my book to organizations.
Consistency. I mean, Bethany, this is what we were talking about earlier, which is like just being really consistent. You know, it's hundreds of small actions and it's a long game. You know, I know everybody's like so focused on that first week, you know, and the book launching and making some lists. But when you have a topic like this, which is perennial, it's evergreen, it's about the long game. 6 years later, you're still talking about this book.
And what's interesting is that I had a goals meeting with my editor. He's no longer with Wiley. I have a new editor now, but he was awesome. Both of my editors have been awesome. We had a meeting to talk about goals. Like, what are my goals for the book, right? Because I also recognized that I had already built a platform. So if I was seeking solely profits, I had to keep more of my royalty or all of the earnings. I could have self-published and just promoted it strictly to my audience. My goal for the book was tied to my goal for the business. And I wanted to leverage my book as part of that impact, to positively impact the lives of women. So we sat down, and he's like, well, a lot of times when he sits down with authors to talk about goals, they're like, I want to get on New York Times bestsellers. And he's like, I'm going to tell you the reality of those. He's like, many authors in his space, they play the game of they will buy 10,000 copies of their own books because those lists are tied to your sales in the first week. And they will buy them strategically from different booksellers, like the indie books, the Amazons, Barnes and Nobles, all of those different categories, because they kind of know when, if you can't buy them all from one place, and they will hope that it gets the attention of someone who's looking at the book sales reports, or they would have built relationships with people who work for these publications. And a lot of times the list is very much, it's not based on the quality of your book. Many times what happens is that authors will invest the money, buy 10,000, 20,000 copies of their books and try to push themselves on these lists. And then when they do conferences and when they do workshops, they then sell their own books, right? Or they will then list those books for sale on their own website. But then you now have this volume of books you have to push. So that's one way people do it. And I was like, I don't want to have a stack of books in my garage. Forget about the list. If you get on them, that's a perk. That's great. But they don't define the success of a book. They don't define how much money you can make from a book. For every one top list author you see, there's 100 that are doing really well or even better, but they've never been on that list. You really have to set the goal and intention for your book. And don't be discouraged if your book comes out and it's not a New York Times bestseller or a Washington Post bestseller. Because a lot of people feel discouraged. And so once that first week of promotion happens, they never mention their book again. Because it didn't get on a list, it didn't do well. That's the wrong mindset to have about it.
Oh my gosh, I love this. Bola, I work with a lot of beginner writers, and they're working on their first book proposal, and they're developing their platform, and they're getting on social media. They're developing their newsletters. They're getting their stuff out there. And they really struggle with feeling like promotion is sleazy.
It's not. Unless your book is a scam. It's just sharing your hard work with people. And also, it's promotion. People have the wrong idea of promotion because they think about it like car salesman. And it's like you're just trying to sell. But there's so much to talk about in a book. You can talk about why you wrote it. That's a sense of promotion. You can talk about the actual topic and why it's meaningful to you. That's a way to promote. You can talk about how this ties into your personal story. You can talk about who you're hoping to help with this book. Every time you mention the book, you are promoting your book. You don't even have to say, buy my book. Even now that we're talking about me and these books, I bet there's someone who's listening to this who's going to be like, you know what, let me go see what these books are that she has written. It's a way of promotion. So promoting doesn't mean asking people to buy perpetually. It just means sharing what you have done, sharing what you have created, sharing what you have written, being honest about it, talking about your struggles writing it, talking about your struggles with the book. It's just sharing. That's what promotion is. It's sharing about what it is you have created.
I agree. People have hesitation in this like shameless self-promotion.
Yeah, but you don't have to be like everybody. You can do it in a way that makes you feel comfortable. I am not comfortable with it. I have a book for $13.95. I'm not comfortable with that way of selling. It's just not me. But I can tell you what I've written about. I can tell you why I've written. I can tell you why the topics are important. I can talk to you about my books.
Well, you're on a mission.
I also think, if you really believe that the content in the book is going to be helpful to people, it's a mindset thing. Like if you really believe that, then why wouldn't you want to let people know about your book, right? I do think mindset is a big part of it as well.
I just wanted to know, what are you working on now?
I have 2 new book agreements in place. So one is to create an updated and expanded version of my first book. It feels like I wrote the book a couple years ago, but it's been 6 years. So we're going to do that. And then I'm working on a workbook that encompasses all 4 books I've written. Those are my 2 side hustle projects.
Oh, Bola, that's awesome. I'm so excited for the workbook. That's going to be so much fun.
I'm excited for it too. And I'm trying really hard to push Federal Finance in Spanish, especially Bookbound. People always ask. And my publisher is also working on a box set.
Why not, right? I love it. I want a box set, Bethany. I want a box set.
I know. I want a box set. Right next to my Laura Ingalls Wilder box set from childhood.
Bola, you're incredible. Thank you so, so much for sharing all of your wisdom and your time with us and your infectious energy, just all of it. We love you. Let our listeners know what is the best way to follow you and to connect with you.
Yeah, so you can find me, my business on all social media platforms at Clever Girl Finance. And you can find my personal social media at Bola Sokunbi. I know that's on Instagram.
Perfection. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on Bookbound.
If you like what you heard, please subscribe and rate and review us on your favorite podcast listening platform.
Please visit us at bookboundpodcast.com for more on us and how we work with authors.